Thank you, Drew. First off, welcome to everyone who is attending this. As Drew mentioned, if you should have any questions throughout this program, please type them into the Q&A or the chat box. Drew will be monitoring those, and he'll probably try to interrupt me, and so we can answer them right then and there, so we don't lose track of our thoughts later at the end and try to go back and remember a bunch of different things. I hope you're going to enjoy this program. The image you see here for the Developing an Instructional Coaching Program for Impact, what I really wanted to do is have a picture of a golf ball going into a pond, because that's what usually happens when I'm out golfing. But it's the same kind of an image I'm looking for. It's like that drop of water going in and then just keep spreading out and getting larger and larger, that ripple effect. And when you have a good instructional coaching program, all of your school improvement types of issues have that kind of an effect, that ripple effect that keeps going out. So as Drew mentioned, I'm the Director of Curriculum Instruction Assessment at Grant Community High School up here in Fox Lake, Illinois, right close to the border. I've been in education back since 1982, and actually I am retiring at the end of this school year. So I can't say I haven't enjoyed it. It's just been an incredible career. I'm looking forward to continuing education as I go forward. And I will tell you that instructional coaching is one of the things that's occurred within the last about 6 years here, and that I'm very excited about. First off, why should you be doing something like instructional coaching? For one, coaching is continuous. It's not just a one-stop shop type of a program. Instructional coaching can also be very, very personal. Each teacher has different needs, different desires, so you can personalize as much as you would like to. A good instructional coaching program will increase the student learning. I'll share a little bit of data with that. It's also in the description for this program. Instructional coaches can run timely, effective building PD. Versus the kind of PD I always used to refer to as the pigeon PD, where districts would spend thousands and thousands of dollars for someone to come in and do a presentation for one day, and then they leave the district. So in other words, they fly by, drop a load, and then they're gone. And teachers are then left to struggle through any kind of the problems they might have. With an instructional coaching program, there's that support that's continuous there within your building. And the other thing, it really can help impact the climate and culture of your school, because you know we're all here supporting you. So like I said, one of the statistics, and this is from the regional lab, is that when teachers receive substantial professional development, and substantial is a key word there, and they look at it as like an average of 49 contact hours over 6 to 12 months. You can see achievement scores go up by an average of about 21 percentage points. If it's sporadic or low dose, one shot and it's done, there is really no statistically significant effect on student achievement. So we kind of look at instructional coaching as a way of providing that continuous professional development to your staff to improve on any one of their instructional strategies or classroom management strategies, whatever a teacher would like to work on and try to improve for the benefit of their students. I want to give you a quick history of our program. We are basically in our 6th year of our instructional coaching team. I will give you a little bit of background about when we first started. We had been doing peer classroom walkthroughs for a couple of years, where I would have about almost a quarter of our staff volunteer to do peer classroom walkthroughs, and we would target a certain strategy that we were looking at, and they would go into someone else's classroom and observe it and see it, and they would be teamed up. And we started to realize a lot of things that they were looking for. They said, oh, that's really interesting. I don't know how to do that in my own classroom. So how do we start to provide that? So we went and presented to the board to start an instructional coaching program. So they gave us the approval. Our first year of the program, it was actually a shared position. We have a staff of about 105 teachers, give and take every year, of just actual full-time teachers. The first year of our program, I had two people who split the instructional coaching position. So one taught in the morning and was an instructional coach in the afternoon, and the other one taught in the afternoon and was an instructional coach in the morning. Um, right before the start of that year, we went to training with Jim Knight out in Kansas. It was a very hot summer out in Kansas. And I remember sitting down with instructional coaches at that training. We were getting a lot of information. We were given time to really work on our programs. And so we were sitting there and panicking, thinking, we're going to go back with this program. And if you're a high school teacher or you work in a high school, high schools can be very different than elementary schools or middle schools, because I've been in all three. So we were afraid we were going to come back and no one would want to work with an instructional coach. So we also planned a whole bunch of different things that we could be doing in order to start out our program and make sure our instructional coaches were busy during the time that they were supposed to be doing. Well, pretty much nothing on that list got done because our program kind of took off right away and we went flying high into some success. The original goal that first year, or when at the start of the program, was that within 2 or 3 years, we would move to 2 full-time instructional coaches. After that first year, or even before the end of the first year, we had so much good data to share with our board that both instructional coaches moved to full-time the second year. That first year of the program, we tracked this data, who works with instructional coaches. About 29% of the staff voluntarily worked with instructional coaches. And I'll be sharing a little bit what are some things that we got, how we got our program out there to them and got people involved in doing that. Last year, before the pandemic hit, 87% of the staff voluntarily worked with our instructional coaches, and in a variety of different formats, which I'll be sharing with you. A couple key things I want to talk about any kind of instructional coaching program. The first is confidentiality. While I oversee our 2 instructional coaches, I will be very, very honest and tell you that when they're doing instructional coaching cycles or working with teachers, unless the teacher chooses to share that information, I do not know who they're working with. So I'll sit down with my instructional coaches periodically. We try to do it once a week if we can find the time, but they're so busy. And they'll talk about, I'm currently working with a teacher, for example, on transitions, or I'm working on a teacher and student engagement for a hybrid classroom. We talk about some strategies. I do not know who that teacher is. The reason why is if it's a voluntary program, we want the teacher to feel free to come, get that support and help without it possibly being reported to an administrator or anyone else. We do let the teacher know that if they choose to share that information, that's totally fine. And I have some teachers who are constantly sharing that information with me. But others I know have worked and they're like, no, I don't want anyone to know. So it's just between the coach and them. This has been a huge key to our success of a successful program. Our teachers know that if they're struggling with something, or I always like to use the term fail is the first attempt in learning, that sometimes they want to try something new, but they're afraid it might fail, that they can work with an instructional coach and it's going to be kept entirely confidential. Another thing I like to address, because we're part of a lot of different instructional coaching organizations, the Chicagoland area of instructional coaches, the North American Institute for Instructional Coaches, our local conference instructional coaches meet. So we've been involved with a lot of different groups. And when you look at instructional coaching programs in different school districts, you're going to see no two are probably alike, which is fine. Everyone must tailor it to their own needs. The way we structured ours is we didn't want to have a literacy coach. We didn't want to have an instructional technology coach. We didn't want to have a math coach. We wanted an instructional coach. Couple of the reasons why we chose to go that route was, one, we look at the teacher should be the expert, especially when we're looking at high school level, and that was their background training in that content. What is it that needs to be taught? So our philosophy is that we like to work on that art and the science of teaching. you know what needs to be taught, you know how kids are going to demonstrate their learning of it. So let's work with you to try to provide as many avenues as possible. So we don't specialize in any particular area. Um, the other thing that we found out is, for example, when we were first starting the program, we had a teacher who was really wanting to get the kids more to do student to student talk instead of teacher talk all the time. Um, and when instructional coach went in, they kind of sat there and realized the first problem is classroom management with that teacher. So they kind of had to tweak the conversation to get the teacher to realize the first thing that we needed to work on was classroom management. So that's why if I have a math coach, which we used to have before as like a part-time basis, if the math coach is wanting to go in and share math strategies, but there's a problem with classroom instruction, they're going to need that whole bag of tricks to be sharing with the teacher. So that's how we chose to do our program, but I know there's other programs where they're technology coaches, literacy coaches, but that's basically how we built our program. Another question that comes up a lot is, should the instructional coach also be teaching? And as I stated at the beginning of our first year of our program, our teachers and our coaches were instructional coach and teacher. But then we went to full-time. And then after the first 2 years, one of my instructional coaches went on a maternity leave. So for 2 years, I had two teachers who split that full-time position, and they would teach for part of the day and be a coach for part of the day. And I still had one full-time instructional coach. And after doing 2 years of that, and that my original instructional coach decided she was going to stay at home, that we had to determine what we're going to do moving forward. So we weighted heavily, and we determined we would kind of prefer that instructional coach is there full time. Now, one of the drawbacks that we knew we had, and we made sure we addressed, was, well, how does it help when if they're not in the classroom all the time? Our instructional coaches are in classrooms so much. They're in there co-teaching with teachers. They've also set up good partnerships. So, for example, if a coach says, you know what, for example, here's this new instructional technology. I want to try it out and see how it works. Can I come into your class? I'll work with you. Either you could do it, I'll run the lesson that day, and we'll get some feedback from the students. So our coaches still go into classrooms a real lot. But one of the things we kind of realized, one of the benefits of having a coach full-time and not teaching part of the day is, for example, we've had a teacher who had a class that they were really struggling with. That class was in the afternoon, but the teacher's time to meet with the coach to talk about it, look at the data, talk about strategies, get feedback on the use of those strategies was in the morning. So we either were dealing with having to work with two different coaches if we had that split position. So we decided to go with full-time coaches. The other thing is, as my two teachers who were sharing the position during the maternity leave, when we sat down and we talked, they kind of said, I can't do the best job for both of those. At times, my classroom's going to take over, which is ultimately, we want our classrooms to be up front and foremost with all of our teachers. And at times I'm doing I'm focusing so much more on instructional coaching that my classroom is suffering. So we decided not to have to put them in between that. And so we're back with two full-time instructional coaches not sharing that position. One of the first things to really think about is, how do you get the right people to be an instructional coach? Having gone through working with at least 5 different instructional coaches here, having worked closely with other districts in their instructional coaching programs, one of the things is, are they kind of a veteran teacher? Now, they don't have to be as old as I am to be an instructional coach, but one of the things we want to look for is someone who has some experience to kind of understand students, understand how the school works. So, have been around long enough. While some of our new teachers are the most gung-ho, greatest ideas or whatever, sometimes they may not have some of the expertise and wisdom that comes with teaching in the classroom that leads to better classroom management or things like that. So you got to make sure that they've been there long enough and, they kind of know the system. Are they a lifelong? Have you seen them? If you're thinking about putting someone into instructional coaching position, have you seen them trying different things, trying to learn different types of instructional technology programs, for example, different instructional strategies? Have you seen them going out to professional development opportunities to increase their expertise? One huge thing that I don't think it's necessary, but it's called instructional coaching. And I think back to being a teacher and a coach myself, coached track and volleyball, is have they coached a sport? So many times I look at, when I'm talking to teachers, I will say, coaching and teaching are really the same thing. A good coach is a good teacher, and a good teacher is a good coach. So if they've coached a sport or something, they have some of that philosophy that's going to be needed to coach teachers. How have you seen them interacting with other staff in school-wide settings? Do they sit with a certain group when you have a full staff PD development thing? Do they sit off by themselves? Are they always just mixing with the same crowd of people, never talking to different types of people? Because you want someone who is going to be able to appeal to all sorts of teachers within your building. If you've ever had the opportunity to watch them, are they active listeners and contribute when you're in group discussions? We do here at our school. We do a lot of, during our institute days and professional developments, we'll do cross-disciplinary activities and mix people up from different disciplines to talk about instructional strategies, grading, other issues. So, how do you see these people interacting? Are they very silent, or do they dominate the conversation, or are they able to sit back, hear what others say, and then interject with some of their own thoughts? And then how do you see your staff? This is something I kind of want to talk about. This comes from Todd Whitaker, is you really need to think about your staff. This is kind of his little philosophy of staff, that 5 to 10% of your staff are probably superstars. They're just great people. They're going to do whatever is best. If they left your school or district, they would be very hard to fill their position for a while, at least, until someone could come in. Those type of people probably become involved with the instructional coaching program, no problem, instructional coaching program for no problem at all, because they're superstars. They constantly want to be growing. Then 80-90% of the staff are your backbones. They're the ones that do the majority of the work in the school. They just keep plugging along. They will take maybe what the initiatives of their district are, and they will try their best to keep moving forward with that. Their vision is still more their classroom or maybe their teaching assignment. It's not quite beyond like the superstars of the school or the district or the world, but they have that good vision. It's like, what am I going to do in my classroom? Because I know I can control that. I'm going to make it the best for my kids. And then, sad to say, you probably have 5 to 10% of your staff that are mediocres. They're negative. When you have a full staff thing, they're back sitting separately by the door or whatever, and their vision is really just a mirror. They're just looking out for themselves. With an instructional coaching program, what you want to be targeting are the superstars and backbones. Those are the ones that you need to be reaching out for. Your mediocres, you're going to get some of them to come along if you have a good program, but we don't want to waste too much of our time focusing just on them. Sometimes they'll see the spark going, but they may have to wait until they're actually burned by the fire before they'll make the movement forward. So as we were building our program, we looked upon the wisdom of some of the best and the brightest. There's some great, I like to call gurus out there in the instructional coaching world. As I stated, we actually got to spend about a week out in Kansas with Jim Knight as part of our first training. And he is great. We look at him a lot for kind of our essential toolbox. He's, I like to say maybe he's a little bit more clinical with some of his the way he attacks instructional coaching, but it was great to help us develop our structure. We, after that training that week, we really came back and had a lot of good structures in place that we knew would lead us to some success. But then we wanted to become the more affective too. And Elena Aguilar, she has some great books out there. And at the end, I'm going to be showing you some of the sources. But she really helped us develop the kind of the mindset of an instructional coach. And a lot of times she focuses more on the heart, because while we have a good structure when we, especially when we go into our full instructional coaching cycles, we have a set structure that we're looking for to try to get everything down. Our most important things we always go to the teacher and say, what is it you really, really want? What's that one thing you really, really want? Let's focus on that. And that came out from Elena Aguilar. And the other, another good source is Joellen Killian and Cindy Harrison's. They talk about the different roles that an instructional coach needs to play. You think, oh, they're just an instructional coach. There's so many different roles, and they have a real good handle on describing what those roles are and how an instructional coach will move in and out of them. So to me, it's like getting a handle on those multiple personalities that you need. So if you kind of build and look at make sure your instructional coaching program has those resources available to instructional coaches, you'll be in a good spot to start. So one of the first things we did was we built our structure. And one of the things we wanted to make sure we do is we were clear to our staff that if you're going to be working with an instructional coach, there are a variety of different ways you can work with an instructional coach. And for each one of those, we developed a set of protocols. And I'm going to be sharing a couple of them, but if not, most of them are all in this slide deck that you'll have access to at the end, which I might have forgotten to mention. At the end, you'll also see a bit.ly, which I know Drew will be sending out an email too. So you'll have access to this whole slide presentation and my email address in case you have any questions you want to follow up with later. So these were the different protocols that we came up with. And when we say protocol, we list out what is it you can expect out of this program from the instructional coach, from you, and what could possibly be your next steps. So we just have a general resource. When we first started out, we called these drive-bys, but that became very politically incorrect after the time. But it was just something where real quick, I need some ideas, like maybe a teacher or PLT would need. Then we developed a formative feedback for the teacher protocol, the data collection protocol, which I'm going to go into a little more detail because that really helped us get this program started and got people involved voluntarily coming to our instructional coaches. We had to make sure we clarified an instructional technology protocol versus just technology support. So for example, if I want to try to use Blooket in my classroom, the instructional technology protocol is why do you want to use it? What's your hopes to get out of it? How are you going to know if it's working or not? It's not how to load it, how to put in your questions. That, while we provide those instructions, our instructional technology protocol focuses on more of why are you using it, what's your intended effect, how are you going to know if that's working, what's going to be the data you're going to collect. And then the two biggies in instructional coaching is a full instructional coaching cycle. And we distinguished between two of these, teacher initiated and administrator initiated. But in an instructional coaching cycle, you're talking about, minimum of probably 10 to 12 hours of collaboration between a teacher and an instructional coach. Because we're going to sit down, do preliminary interviews, we're going to go into classrooms, take preliminary data, come back, follow up, discuss that data with the teacher, offer up a menu of options for a teacher to try. The teacher picks one, they make sure the teacher understands that. The teacher then implements that in their classroom. The instructional coach goes back in while implementing if they would like to help give feedback, but definitely afterwards to collect more data, they come back and review it. So that's that full, when we talk about instructional coaching, obviously that's the biggie. And so we have those guidelines. The difference between teacher-initiated and administrator-initiated, I'll just quickly highlight here, is the administrator-initiated, which out of the last 6 years, there's only been 3 times we've had to use this. That's when one of our teachers receives an unsatisfactory on their Danielson framework evaluation in one of the areas. And then the administrator will work with the instructional coach and the teacher to improve that. In that case, an administrator-initiated coaching cycle, which you'll see also later in the slide, the information is shared between the administrator, coach, and the teacher. If it's a teacher-initiated coaching cycle, once again, all of the information from any of those first 5 protocols there is strictly confidential between the teacher and the instructional coach.
Hey, Greg, real quick, we have a question that
Yes.
came in, and it's simply, if you are planning to address the training for coaches, please share the specifics of that training. This was around 317. When, how long, who did it, where, etc.
Okay, yeah, I'll go back. We did the training with Jim Knight. He used to work with the University of Kansas, but now I think he's out on his own in the Knight Institute. And you'll see one of his resources. He runs trainings out there. He runs one on video recording, using video recording instructional coaching. He's really expanded those. 6 years ago, it was just about instructional coaching, developing an instructional coaching program through the Knight Institute. He wasn't with the University of Kansas back then. And then the rest of it, a lot of our training, I will let you know with how we do it is myself and my instructional coaches, we will read all of the professional books that I'll share at the end, plus several others. If we want to learn certain strategies, for example, we wanted to build up our repertoire dealing with formative assessment. So we attended Dylan William training. I can't remember if that was through ASCD or maybe IPA a few years back. We read his book. We went to his training. I always, if I'm sending my coaches to a training, I go with them too. So at the administrative level, we kind of know and we talk about how we're going to make this fit into our community. So the main training that we went to was Jim Knight's training through the Knight Institute.
Another question just came in that could you share your protocols for the types of coaching?
Yes, they're going to be in a little bit later in the program. The first one I'll be talking about is the data collection, and you'll just see the quick protocols that we have. So going back, unless there's other questions right now, like I said, going off of the Field of Dreams movie, just because you build something, it doesn't mean they're going to come. That's not a market plan. You're going to have to figure out if you want this to be voluntary, which I really strongly suggest. It's great to have a voluntary program because then you know the teacher's going to change. If you force teachers into instructional coaching, too often we know they'll go through the motions, but then they go way back to that philosophy. I'm going to shut my door and do what I want afterwards. So we really want that change to be systemic, that we want teachers to continue to seek out help, keep trying these new things with support. So just because you build an instruction program doesn't mean they're going to come. You need somewhat of a marketing plan. So you got to challenge yourself. You really got to never give up. And this is where we sat down and said, how are we going to get ourselves out there to our people? So these are just some of the things that we did to get our instructional coaching program out there. First off, one of the very first few things we did was we knew we'd be working with our new teachers. In our district, new teachers have 2.5 days of new teacher orientation. One of those days, the entire day is spent with myself and the instructional coaches. We go over what are some of our instructional initiatives, some of our main programs here with instruction, what we seek. We have a teaching strategy that we call Teaching with Purpose. We teach them what we expect out of that, how to do it within their classrooms. So they spend a whole day with us. And so they get to meet the instructional coaches. And then our instructional coaches, shortly after that, the first week of school or 2 weeks of school, they're just popping around to all the new teachers every morning and every afternoon, just saying, how are you doing? Making sure they're keeping up with them. So typically we see our new teachers right away becoming involved in our instructional coaching programs. We try to offer some professional development offerings. One of the first things we did was in one of our first Institute days, we decided our staff needed some refreshers about, for example, our student services team, our crisis management plan. We had a new nurse, a new full-time nurse, and some of those protocols dealing with the nursing thing. So what we did is we broke our staff into small groups, and they did a kind of a station rotation for a whole afternoon. PBIS was one of the stations. And one of the stations was instructional coaching. So small groups, I think it was about 10 teachers came, and the instructional coaches, that's where they presented their data protocol, not the data protocol, all the different protocols. So every staff member got to see the instructional coaches and heard what they could be doing. Another one of the things that we did to help right away was we set up a series of what we call drop-ins. And our drop-in professional developments are, we pick a topic that we develop about a 45-minute program, and we run that program all day long. Since we're high school, we're on a typical bell schedule. So every period we run the same professional development training. So some years we've done it on 21st century learner characteristics. Some we've done it on some instructional technologies. One year we did on formative assessment. So we'll run different programs, typically about once a month. We'll run them. We always pick the same day of the week to run them, so teachers kind of always know that. We advertise them. And then at the end of those programs, we always say, so if you need any help or want any more information, meet with an instructional coach. So that's just one of the quick ones we do. Besides anything that we do, professional development that we run, such as district credit, graduate credit courses, Institute day trainings, other types of professional development. The data collection round, I'm going to go over that. That's an actual protocol that we have, which really helped us get a start out there, and I'll be going over that in a second. We send out regular communications. We try to change these up. For about a year or two, we were doing a newsletter called Empower that came out once a month, and the Empower was focusing on a specific instructional theme. And so we would work with instructional coaches, get some of the research, some of the background of it. We work with a teacher who was instituting some of those instructional themes, and get some teacher input, get student input. We put together a huge newsletter called Empower. Right now, with the pandemic and things changing so rapidly, this whole year we've been doing a What We Learned This Week. It's a kind of a one-page newsletter of things that we've talked about, learned this week as we are in classrooms, seeing things, seeing what teachers are asking for. We also, instructional coaches, the very, very first year, went around to every PLT or PLC team and looked at and met with the PLT and talked to them to explain how they can help an entire PLT, because instructional coaching doesn't have to be for an individual teacher. If a PLT is needing to work on something, they'll work with the whole PLT. And the other key thing, because we want our instructional coaches to kind of be in the know of what's going on, what the board is actually looking for, what the administrative team is looking for. We try to make sure that our instructional coaches are members of any school or district committees where we have that type of representation. So we're Future Ready Schools, so they were on that committee. We have a professional development committee, they're on that committee. They've served on our assessment literacy committee. They serve on our teaching and learning committee. So they're on a lot of different committees. But that way they're kind of in the know. They're hearing the pulse from the teachers and from others. So one, they can start to develop things to get out for different staff members. As I said, one of our protocols is a data collection protocol. So basically, what that means is, this was one of our ideas when we were doing our training, and worry that no teachers would want to sign up to work with an instructional coach. So we decided, you know what, we ran the peer classroom walkthrough, and we get a little bit of data about what was really happening in our classrooms. So I worked with our administrative team and said, let's have the instructional coaches go out. They'll go into classrooms, collect data. It will not be tracked. We made sure I'll be very, very honest. We talked to our union leadership to make sure they were going to be okay with this. I said, whatever data we're collecting is not going to be tracked to a teacher. It's not tracked to a specific room. We track that we went into a room, but the data is tracked somewhere entirely separately. So we can't mix those two together. And so we would look for things like, how are teachers implementing teaching with purpose? We might do a data collection protocol on commands versus community. So for example, the instructional coaches would send out an email and say, we're going to be starting a data collection run. We're going to try to visit every classroom at least once for about maybe 10 minutes and collect some data. At the end, we'll share all of the data we collect with our entire staff. You will see it's totally anonymous, but it's just information. We think about it, but it's also letting us know, are there certain professional developments that we may need to be running? So they just started going, and so I have the instructional coaches send out that email, not myself, so it's not an administrator sending it out. And they just started going around to classrooms, popping into classrooms, collect data, and then they would leave. And it's so often as they were doing that, a teacher would go, grab them as they were leaving the room or something and say, so how'd I do? And the instructional coach said, well, I'm just here collecting data. I'm not evaluating the data. We're just collecting the data. If you would like me to look at what you're doing in this class or concerning this strategy, I'd be glad to come back and I'll collect that data and share that with you, and we can talk about it. And so teachers quickly started to realize, one, they became very comfortable with people in their classrooms, and they realized it was kind of a harmless kind of a insight because the data was not shared about them. And so it's worked very, very effectively. As a matter of fact, through this year, through the pandemic, we've been doing data collection through Zoom bombing, basically our teachers' rooms. We use Schoology as our learning management system. So my instructional coaches have admin rights to that, so they can go into teachers' classrooms. Because one of the things we wanted to look at when we were fully remote is, what kind of a strategy is a teacher using for their synchronous learning? How are they managing it? Some of our teachers were here in the building, and then some of our teachers were teaching remotely from home. So we were looking at that data, collecting that, and then starting to share ideas with our staff in our weekly newsletter. And now more recently, since we've been in the hybrid model, we've been doing data collection on how do our teachers handle our remote kids with our kids who are in person, how they manage some of those things within the classes. One of our struggles we know our teachers were having was, all the attendance tracking. How do I, manage all this? But I also want my kids engaged, and I want the flow of the class to keep moving. So we collected some data on that, shared some of the strategies out with our teachers. So the data collection protocol is basically that: is we're going to come out, we're going to collect these. It's not being used in an evaluative manner. We'll summarize it, and we'll share it with the staff. Whether it's at a full meeting, whether we send out one of our newsletters. But that's how we really got our teachers into the habit of instructional coaches being within their room. And I'll tell you, there were funny stories when we first started. Instructional coach would pop in the room, and a teacher would go, "Oh, I didn't ask for you." We were like, "No, we're just coming in to do data collection. It's nothing. It's not an instructional coaching thing." So, but it really got our teachers comfortable with the fact of, we're going to be within the classrooms. So, that whole process of getting yourself out there in a way where they can trust you, they know it's going to be confidential, and then you just keep calm and keep carrying on. Some of our other protocols, and I'm not going to go through all of these in quite detail, but the general resource, like I said, this was kind of our originally when we started, we call it our drive-by. So a teacher just says, hey, I want to try this. If you have an idea or whatever, we'll give some quick support. And then we'll start to say, do you want me to come and track some data with that? Would you like some feedback on it? So the reason why we have these protocols is also each year we have to provide a report to our board about our instructional coaching program. So we track, how many times have we had general resources? How many times have we done data collection? How many times have we done instructional technology? How many times have we done formative feedback? And what were all the topics for those? So the general resource protocol is just a quick, maybe a meeting or two, just kind of sharing some things, but we're not necessarily going to collect data for them. Then we start to move to our formative feedback protocol possibly.
Real quick, Greg, someone asked, what type of data are you collecting?
So for example, when we did our data collection, one of the things we were one of them was, like I said, commands or community. So what we would do is we go into the classrooms, and for the first about 10 minutes, we would track teachers, the teacher talk by, were they giving commands or were they doing things that built a community? So for example, if the teacher would start the class by saying, okay, take out your assignment from yesterday, that was a command. We really stress building teacher-student relationships. So we wanted to see how many, within a 10-minute span of periods, how many commands were given and how many comments were made that were more community building. We've tracked things like how much time is teacher talk, how much time is student talk. We've tracked open-ended versus closed-ended questions. We've tracked how does a teacher present their teaching with purpose. We've gone through, one of the things as we started to do that, we expect our teachers somewhere near the beginning of the part of the class, they do their teaching with purpose, which means what are we going to learn today? Why is this important? And how are you going to know if you've got it? And make sure they cover that with the students. And then we started to quickly realize our teachers were doing a great job with that. We were seeing that happening, but then they never went back to it at the end of the period. So then we started to do a data collection at the end of the periods. We would go in and we'd see how is the teacher going back and reviewing their teaching with purpose to make sure, were they checking on their students' understanding and stuff. So those are just some of the examples of the data collection that we've done over the course of several different years. The formative feedback protocol, this is where a teacher wants to get some feedback. Am I calling on more boys and girls? Am I calling on the kind of that tier arrangement that you can get in the classroom sometimes? How much time is spent teacher talk versus student talk? Any of those data collection types of things, but it could be anything a teacher wants to keep track of. And they'll just say, I can't be the eyes in my room. I need you to be the eyes. So instructional coach come in, collect the data. They make sure they understand exactly, they work with the teacher. What is exactly you want me to collect? They develop a data collection form. The teacher says, yep, that'll work for me. The instructional coach comes in and says, here you go. Here's the data. And then they leave it up to the teacher then. At that point, they're just saying, you just want the data. If you want to meet with me, discuss it further, move into instructional coaching cycle, I'll be glad to do that. If not, here's the data. If the teacher goes, well, do you think that's good or bad? Then they'll say, okay, well, let's move into instructional coaching cycle. Let's discuss this, because what would you like to see change? Like the instructional technology protocol, remember I talked about that a little bit earlier. This is basically, why do you want to use that instructional technology? Now, of course, with remote teaching and hybrid teaching, we're having to use a lot more of it, but it's always going forward because our view of instructional technology is we still look at the teaching as that core. You can look at the SAMR model. You can look at some of the other models, but it's like, what's the purpose of instructional technology? Well, how are you wanting to try to improve it? So we work with them on that instructional technology, which one might be best for whatever purpose they want to use. And then, like I said, we have our full coaching cycles. The teacher initiated one, strict, total teacher confidentiality. This, like I said, this can take 10, 12 hours, possibly longer. We always look at, there's always a goal that the teacher wants to achieve. And then we always look at, have they achieved that goal by the end of the cycle? If not, then they may try a new strategy, they go, or they move into a different cycle. A lot of them will follow up with the cycle, say, okay, I've got that down, that was a success. Now I'd like to try to move on to this. And like I said, the differences between the teacher initiated and the administrator initiated coaching cycle. One is obviously that information shared because that teacher has gotten an unsatisfactory, so it's shared with the administrator. But another key point here is when we start an instructional coaching cycle, the instructional coach sits down and meets with the teacher. If it's an administrator initiated one, we tell the administrator, you have to be there because we want to make sure the coach works with the teacher on exactly the thing that the administrator has seen that the teacher is unsatisfactory with. Also, we are very clear with our administrative staff that if you want it to be an administrative initiated cycle, you have to tell the teacher you must work with an instructional coach. Many times our administrators say, you might want to work with an instructional coach on this to improve. That does not mean it's administrator initiated. That's up to the teacher. We're telling our administrators, if you really want them, you've got to be clear. Don't muddy the waters because we want to keep that confidentiality important with our teachers. So the administrator must sit down and they must say to the teacher, they have to let the teacher know you must work. We don't let the administrator say, go to the instructional coach and say, hey, will you contact this teacher and set up a coaching cycle? No, that's not how it works. Took a year or two to get our administrators fully comfortable with that, but they totally have bought into that process. They totally understand it. Like I said, in our 6 years, we've only had 3 administrator initiated coaching cycles. And 2 of those were very, very successful. Our teachers are tenured here and still working. So we think that's very, very important. Our administrators will say, they'll come, I'll meet with them and we'll talk and they say, well, I know that teacher probably worked with an instructional coach. And I will just go, I don't know. I don't know that because that's confidential. I said, you can ask the teacher if they're willing to share it, then they will, but they don't have to be sharing that. So that's the difference between those. I'm just going to, since for sake of time, these are our steps in our coaching cycle, our first steps, really working on the goal. Like I said, these steps can take several different meetings, identifying a strategy. A big thing of our instructional coaching cycle, I always tell my instructional coaches is you have to prepare a menu. When you work with a teacher, you don't say, here's one thing I want you to try. You say, here's 3 different things that you can try. Let's talk about them. Which one do you want to use? And then the teacher will say, I like to use this strategy. So the coach will say, okay, let's focus on that. We'll see how that works. But we don't want it to be just, here's this one thing we want you to try. We want a teacher, one, to realize there's a lot of different things that they could try. And we like to say novelty and variety. That's a very good brain compatible strategy. So we want to offer our teacher a whole bag of tricks to kind of be using. And then we have our instructional coaching cycle summary. This is a sample of one where our 2 coaches, Chelsea Wolf and Tom Evans, worked with, where a teacher realized the difference between their advanced biology class and regular biology task, the percent of students on task. So our instructional coaches went in, tracked data in the advanced biology class and the regular biology class. And you can see the difference in the percentage of students on task. Also the reinforcing behavior, where it was reinforcing behaviors that were noted were academic or behavior, and then the corrective behaviors. These are part of Jim Knight's toolkit that we talk about. So we saw the teacher spent a lot more time on corrective behaviors, less time on the reinforcing, and the students were off task. So basically, we asked the teacher, we presented our teacher with 3 different strategies: witness to the good, which was gym night; fluent correctness, which was gym night; and win-win from Dr. Kagan. And our goal was we wanted to decrease the disruptive behaviors and increase the reinforcing interactions. So the teacher, after learning about these 3 different strategies, selected the witness to the good. And typically in witness to the good, it's a 5-to-1 ratio, but that can be really hard. So we and our PBIS team used it at this same ratio too. And after every time I give make a negative comment or whatever, or a correction, I want to point out 3 positive. Doesn't have to be the same student. I want to reinforce 3 positive behaviors that I see going on. Because what we want to do is get kids we want to see the positive going on more. So the teacher went through and tried this and put it into practice for a little bit. And then the instructional coach came back in and tracked what was going on in that class. And they went from like 63% up to 97%. The reinforcing behaviors went up dramatically versus the corrective behaviors. The neat thing about this is the teacher then told the instructional coach, I want you to come back every 2-3 weeks, track this data again for me just to make sure I'm doing this. And they did, and the teacher was still successful with that. So just some of our numbers. In our first year of the program, we had 42 complete coaching cycles. That's that 10, 12-hour minimum. We did 42 of those. We saw that increasing every year. 2017 and 18, we had 92. That was our highest. 2018 and 19, we dropped a little bit, but that was because that was the first year where I had 2 teachers splitting the full-time position. They couldn't quite do as many coaching cycles because they were not available all day long. So it dropped a little bit. Last school year, heading into the pandemic, we weren't necessarily able to complete all the coaching cycles, so we don't really have complete data on that. I do know that right now, this year, we are on target probably to have our highest yet of complete coaching cycles. When we have a coaching cycle, somewhere between 88 every year to 90% of those cycles are completed. That's where we look at what was that goal that we worked with the teacher established, and did they meet their goal after that? Some of those that are not completed are because they're closer to the end of the year, they don't get it finished, and they roll over into the next year. And over the past 3 years, anywhere from 71 to 104 out of our 105 staff members have participated in our voluntary PD drop-ins that we run throughout the time period. This is just one of the things that we share with our board every year to kind of highlight our program, and we actually give them more detail. But this was from the 18-19 years, so you can see 95% of the teachers met their goals, 92% worked with an instructional coach. Out of those 92, 30 of them worked with 2 coaches, and 22 actually worked with all 3 because that was the year we were sharing. Over on the right, you can see these were our main topics that we were working on throughout that entire year. We always try to get testimonials from our teachers that we share with our board also. So that's just one of the things that we develop every year as part of our sharing our program with our staff. As I mentioned here, these are some of our key resources that we've used. Gym Nights High Impact Instruction. We really use that to target some of the strategies we offer to our teachers. Taking the Lead is, like I said, is Joellen Killian's book and Cindy Harrison's book that really looks at all the different roles instruction coach plays. Just one of Elena Aguilar's is The Art of Coaching Teaching. She's got a new one coming out, or it's out already. It's The Art of Coaching for Equity. She's a great resource. We had the ability to be in a virtual conference with her. Absolutely phenomenal. And of course, Gym Nights Instructional Playbook are just some of the key resources. Like I said, we use a lot of other more specific ones. Dillian Williams on formative assessment, we've used that. So we'll use a lot of Dave Nagel's on assessment and grading if that is an issue that a teacher wants to work on. So those are just some of our resources. And I'll end and deal with any other questions by saying, here's my contact information, and Drew's going to be getting it out. The bit.ly for this entire presentation is there. My email address, so if any of you need to contact me, please don't hesitate, send me an email. I'll be glad to share whatever I can with you about it, because we value our instructional coaching program and we think it's been such a benefit. So with that, Drew, any other questions?
Yeah, we've got a few, and I'll just kind of run through them. How do you determine what you'll be focusing on during your data collection visits?
We've looked at that from a variety of different ways. Some of the things we look at is we talk to our administrative team and see what some of their concerns are. We use Frontline to aggregate the teacher evaluation. So if we see if there's certain areas under the Danielson framework that are low, then we'll try to go out and do some more data collection on those to see if we're seeing it all the time. A lot of times, if there's been a new initiative within the district, then we'll go out and collect the data to see how that's going. Because when we do data collection, like I said, we hit every room in the building at least once. So hopefully it's every teacher too, knowing some teachers switch rooms. But, or if we say, we think this might be something good our teachers might like, but let's see if it's something they really, really need, then we'll also do data collection on that.
Great, thank you. Another question is, if your school is introducing a new resource or curriculum, do the instructional coaches provide the professional development?
We typically do for a lot of our new programs, whether it, for example, we've done some SEL with our PBIS team, so they'll do it. If it's for a specific curriculum we're adopting, we'll have the coaches be in, we'll meet with typically like the publisher or whatever, as they're training some of the teachers. If it's a specific curriculum, obviously we'll work with the publisher too, but then the coaches would attend that as part of that. So
great. And we have a couple of questions about these cycles, and I'll kind of combine them. This will probably be our last question, and then just a heads up to folks, you will be getting an email tomorrow that will have a link to the recording as well as an evaluation that you will need to complete in order to receive PD credit for today. So with that, last question, how long is each cycle, and what's been the most helpful in getting your coaches to be consistent in the work and cycles they're doing?
How long is each cycle can vary. Like I said, when we first started the program and we were tracking, like I said, it ranged between 10 to 12 hours, which included meeting with teachers, going in, collecting data, some research on the behalf of the coaches to find some of the different strategies. So our coaches pretty much track their time all with everything that they're doing. So we would see that like a full coaching style on average was anywhere from 10 to 12 total hours on the part of the coach, a little bit less on the part of the teacher because the teacher didn't have to do the research, the coach does that. So it might be maybe more like 10 hours for the teacher, but they sit down, they meet, they go over all the questions, really hone in. It's really the process of making sure we narrow our scope. We don't want to try to address too much. We want to deal with one thing, and then if that works, move on to something else. And how do we make sure we're consistent? A lot of the times our coaches will ask the teacher, do you mind if me, Greg, sits in on this process to make sure we're doing the exact same type of a thing? If not, I'll sit down with the coaches and we'll discuss what happened, went through that. I've even gone through in the data collection protocols, I've done that too, but when they're going in to collect data for a teacher, they will ask the teacher, do you mind if Greg comes in here too, collects the data, so that way we can norm our data, make sure we're getting the exact same type of information. Or both instructional coaches will go in, collect the data, and come back and talk about that and make sure they're doing that. If you saw, when you look at the thing, you'll see the different steps to the whole kind of instructional coaching cycle. They really, until the coach was really solid with that whole process, they filled out that form in detail every single time. Now, they just kind of make cursory notes for each one of those areas. But the first 3 years of the program, they had detailed notes on every one of those parts, and we would look at that information together.
Great. Thanks so much, Greg, for today. Thanks to all of our participants. You all did fantastic. Again, sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but again, Greg's email will be in the email tomorrow that I send out, that will have the recording as well as the link to the evaluation. So once again, thank you to everyone and have a great afternoon.